The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Yeah, baby. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and today is a very special day. It is the first edition of our new radio podcast, Cosmic Catastrophe. Now, Cosmic Catastrophe podcast, the reason we're doing it is to open your eyes to alternative possibilities and timelines potentially suppressed by the powers that be. And a lot of people don't understand why these timelines would be suppressed, but as the show goes on, you're going to understand why many of these things are being hidden. Because it is our belief that at one time there were ancient, far advanced civilizations that have been wiped off the map. So that is what the show is about in a general sense, and I will be your main host, but my beautiful partner, Leah, will be joining us occasionally. Now, both of us have backgrounds in academia. My background is a paleoclimatologist. I'm a geologist and a field geologist, and I used to teach at university in Philadelphia at Temple. And so I actually have been to thousands of locations and have looked at these catastrophic events that happen time and time again. If you look at the rock record, what you will find is catastrophes as opposed to non-catastrophes. The pervasive mode of geology on the planet Earth, like we've all been living in what's called a quiet time. This is the Holocene warm. This is between ice ages. You know, we can grow crops. It's warm out during the summer, things like this. But there have been times in the past that happen again and again and again in a cyclic fashion, typically every 12,000 or so years, where major catastrophes occur in the form of cosmic catastrophe. Now, you may ask yourself, what is the biggest threat to human existence? And many of you will answer perhaps nuclear war. Some of you may say global warming because of the brainwashing. Others may say a large-scale pandemic because of the fear they just lived through. But assuming we can overcome all of these challenges, I think a lot of people are unaware of the threats coming from space. Now, living on our blue little planet seems safe until you're aware of some of these threats that are lurking. What we're going to do is we're going to give a general overview on today's podcast on some of these threats. And in future podcasts, what we will do is break down the threats individually, perhaps bring in the topic of ancient civilizations, and we'll get to that later in the podcast. But today is a general overview to bring you up to speed on some of the cosmic catastrophe threats that we are going to be discussing. The most important one, the most obvious for those of you that dive into these topics, is going to be the high energy solar flare. Some people are calling it micronova, and many people out there know about the 1859 Carrington event. Now, the high energy solar flare is probably the number one cosmic catastrophe that will happen potentially in your lifetime. And the reason is because large flare events like this occur with a periodicity of about 150 years. And the last large event was 1859. So we are now decades overdue for a very large high-end X flare or something even bigger. So that is the number one threat, and that's the threat that we warn about on our channels on YouTube. If you don't know about our presence on YouTube, we have two amazing channels, Oppenheimer Ranch Project and Magnetic Reversal News. And if you just type that into the search bar, when you go to YouTube, you'll easily find our channels. On both channels, we discuss the esoteric, we discuss what's wrong with mainstream science, and we do a lot of predicting earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and we do some weather forecasting based on the changes on Earth. Specifically, for those that are listening that are unaware, our magnetic field since the Carrington event in 1859 has been rapidly waning or reducing in strength. And not only that, the position of the North and South poles are rapidly moving towards each other to a single point just west of Indonesia. Now, currently, the North Pole is still up near the rotational North Pole, but the South Pole has literally left the continent of Antarctica and is now just off the southern coast of Australia. And because of these magnetic changes, another cosmic catastrophe, bad things happen on Earth. And if you watch our channels, and if you haven't, I will now divulge to you that in recent years, there has been very good high-resolution scientific data in the fields of paleontology to reveal the fact that these field fluctuations, these magnetic excursions, they affect the biology on Earth very significantly. In fact, it is purported and backed up by many peer-reviewed studies that the extinction of Neanderthal man occurred during one of the lowest field events in the last 100,000 years, and that is the Lechamp magnetic excursion. So we've got solar flares and the problem with solar flares is that if a Carrington event happens today, we run on a grid system. We run on in an electrical world filled with very fragile technology. And a large solar flare of this size happened today, we would be knocked back into the Stone Age, literally. And because of the ineptitude of humanity, there would be a large portion of the population that would die off quite rapidly. Within the first month, we would have billions dead. So that's one thing to consider. And we might also discuss a little bit about preparedness on this channel. But first, let's go over some other more esoteric cosmic catastrophe scenarios that are less likely to occur. We now know that we are in a magnetic excursion, so that one's happening. The solar flare is imminent, so we should prepare for having no power for a very long period of time, years. But there are other threats, and one of the most obvious that even children know about is asteroid impact. We all learn at a young age about the extinction of the dinosaurs due to a large asteroid or comet. Now, luckily, these events happen very infrequently, but we've just seen a mission coming from NASA, the DART mission, where they literally plunged a satellite into one of these objects, a binary asteroid. They plunged an object to it, and they not only probably moved the trajectory of the object, but they created a dust tail, I think 1,000 kilometers long. So we are now in the act of practice of figuring out how to readjust asteroids. And that might be because asteroid impact is definitely a threat to humanity, our entire planet. A large object hitting the ocean would cause catastrophic tsunamis planet-wide, and specifically the ocean that it struck. If it struck in the center of the Pacific, we're talking about 1 billion people that would probably be dead within a few hours. So the asteroid impact is clearly a threat to the planet, but albeit a very, very slim chance of asteroid impact. With our technology, we can look out there and we're monitoring thousands of near-Earth objects. And we can also see objects coming in from outside of our solar system into the solar system, like a recent extraterrestrial object called Oumuamua, I believe, which is an interstellar coming from a different star system, perhaps, into our solar system. So, asteroid impact is a big threat as far as cosmic catastrophe. Some more esoteric ones are our sun itself. Now, the expanding sun idea would be that there are changes on the sun that would cause it to shift in dynamics and go from, let's say, a yellow dwarf to a white dwarf or even a supergiant through some internal process. And so there is a hypothesis out there that stars can change size very rapidly. And if our star were to double in size, any biology on Earth would immediately fry, our oceans would evaporate, and Earth would look something similar to Mars. And there are some hypotheses about why Mars looks so dead and atmosphere free, it could be because of cosmic catastrophe in the past that had ripped the atmosphere and evaporated the oceans. And now we've got just the red planet we know as Mars, which is a terrible place to consider living. That one's out there for Elon. We have something called gamma ray bursts that we may worry about. Now, gamma ray bursts are extremely powerful outbursts of energy, and these can be caused by supernova in the distance, binary systems, and the energy bursts are extremely powerful. Now, they need to be directed at our planet for it to happen. Now, we know this has happened in the past because of proxy data in the ice and spikes in things like beryllium and other radioactive nucleotides that come from space. So there have been recent spikes like the Charlemagne event, which is in 774 AD, which caused a massive carbon spike in tree rings and other data. So these gamma ray bursts happen quite frequently in the order of thousands of years, or gamma ray events, but they very well also may be coming from our own star. It's impossible to know the source of these gamma rays, except that they make it to Earth. That's what we do know. So they're either coming from space or our sun. So once again, if you've been listening from the beginning, we've got the sun affecting potentially the magnetic field on Earth, a magnetic reversal, or it could be some other source. We have the threat of a Carrington-like event, a solar flare that could happen at any moment because we're decades overdue. And now we have these gamma ray bursts that potentially could be coming from the sun. So there are other extremely esoteric cosmic catastrophe scenarios that a few of us have heard of. Many of you know the work of Velikovsky, and he believed that in the recent past, within the last few thousand years, that planets in our solar system were much closer together, or were doing some kind of reorganization where planets were in close proximity to each other and causing massive catastrophes in the form of, well, unimaginable events where you have huge tectonic movements, earthquakes, volcanoes, the sun darkening, shifts in orbit, just all over the gamut. So that would be in moving planets or even moving stars. We do have some accounts in astronomy, in academia, that Barnard's star and other stars used to be in close proximity to our solar system and are now moving away. There are some other hypotheses about Earth being in or our solar system being in a binary system where our sun is binary with perhaps Sirius. And you can look up the Binary Institute, I believe, for more information on that. It's been around for decades. And the problem with that is the distance between the stars is in the number of 10 to 15 light years, so a little too far away maybe for binary interaction, but who knows? Now, I've told you about a lot of theories of potential dangers that Earth faces due to cosmic catastrophes, and I hope you've whittled it down in your head that the ones I need to worry about are large solar flares and the current magnetic excursion on Earth. These are both known cosmic catastrophes with known effects that have happened in antiquity. What other evidence do we have that these cosmic catastrophes happen, and should we be worried? Well, have any of you heard of the Toba catastrophe theory? This is the theory that the Toba volcano, which is a supervolcano, and erupted 74,000 years ago at the site of the present Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia. It's one of the Earth's largest known eruptions, and the Toba catastrophe theory holds that this event caused a global volcanic winter that lasted perhaps 6 to 10 years, and possibly a 1,000-year cooling period afterwards. Now, what the theory purports and what archaeology supports is that the population on Earth was reduced 90%, maybe more. And some people suggest that population was reduced to as few as a few thousand individuals left on Earth. Now, quickly, we repopulated, but a similar event just occurred 12,900 years ago, the Younger Dryas event. And prior to that event, there were millions of Clovis people in North America hunting megafauna, mammoths, and other large beasts. They were butchering them in large sites nearby where I am podcasting from now in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. And millions of people here butchering hundreds of large mammoths at single sites. So clearly the population was high and there was plenty of food. But after the 12,900 year event, there is not a single shred of the Clovis people in North America, nor that of megafauna. Another bottleneck. Just 12,900 years ago, and we're not taught this in school. We don't learn about the Toba bottleneck. We don't learn about the Younger Dryas mass extinction. No one taught me about the Lachamp magnetic excursion 42,000 years ago that ended Neanderthal and pushed Homo sapiens into the limelight. Did they tell you? So it seems like we have a pattern of cosmic catastrophe, whether it be a catastrophe that we call a geologic catastrophe. Most of these major eruptions, like the Toba eruption, are happening during magnetic excursions. When the field on Earth changes and the dynamics of Earth go from quiet to wild. It is my belief that all the mountain building events, the huge mountain ranges, were made in decades rather than millions of years of slow creep and uplift. That some people on the planet witnessed entire mountain ranges rising and entire continents like Atlantis falling. And all these times of catastrophe to humanity are driven by the universe. There is some dynamo that is out there that resets the situation time and time again. But the good news, we're still here. Even after the largest supervolcanic eruption in recent memory, the Toba eruption, we made it. And millions of diverse species continued to exist. Because life presses on. Now there's tons and tons of evidence around the world that there were ancient civilizations far more advanced than archaeology lets on. And I don't know why. The evidence in Egypt alone, in advanced cutting and megalithic technology, and what I was taught as a child in grade school about ramps and slaves and ropes is still being taught now. But there are megalithic marvels that are unexplained. There are other strange phenomenon like Derinkuyu and underground cities in Cappadocia. The mainstream claims that the moai of Easter Island were carved recently. Yet back in the 80s, Thor Heyerdahl excavated one that was buried 60 feet deep. The heads sticking out are just the heads of an entire body. And the moai figure themselves and the suppressed images from Thor Heyerdahl's excavation show the moai with the same creepy alien hands touching at the belly button that the pillars in Kobegli Tepe show, which are dated 11,500 years ago. So here we get into some of the disconnect. Mainstream archaeologists in Turkey say that the T-pillars that mimic the Moai with their hats and have the same arms across the front are 8,000 years apart. Completely ridiculous. So why the underground cities in Derinkuyu in Cappadocia? Clearly, people needed to go underground for a reason. Now, their explanation is to hide the women and children. Some of these cities hold 20,000 people or more. Livestock. On and on. Just mind-blowing. So clearly, entire cities knew they needed to be underground for long periods of time. But why? Well, you know why. Any number of cosmic catastrophes could be occurring. Now, during magnetic excursions like the one we're living, it is hypothesized that at some point the field strength gets so weak that our weather systems completely break down and get reorganized. This leads to crop loss and famine and pestilence and disease. It also leads to tenfold increases in wind speed, hail size, storm size, rainfall totals, snowfall totals, and the duration of droughts. So you haven't seen anything yet until you've seen a 17-inch hailstone fall from the sky. So clearly one of the reasons maybe Turkey's underground city of 20,000 people existed. Because if you were outside, you didn't stand a chance. And more subterranean corridors are being found across the world. The most recent in northeast Iran. Now, what I find interesting is some of the oldest archaeological sites and more are being found every day in this region. But let's focus on Turkey and Kobegli Tepe. The site has been dated to 9500 BC. It's 11,500 years old. And the conclusion of everyone that has worked on the site is that it was purposefully buried. Now, these tepes are hills in Turkey. And in many podcasts I've done on the subject, people are like, oh, these were covered in the Great Flood. The problem is that these are on the top of the hill, not the bottom of the valley that would get filled with debris during the Great Flood. Debris does not get deposited on the tops of mountains. It gets deposited in valleys. So therein lies the problem. Almost all of the hill site temple sites in Turkey are purposefully buried. And one that was just recently discovered, Bonçuklu Tarla, is even older than Kobegli Tepe, dating back to 12,500 years. And it too was intentionally buried. So we have sites around the world intentionally buried at a time of a major catastrophe that caused a mass extinction, erased the Clovis people off the map, and most of the megafauna in North America gone. Saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, cave bear, giant sloth, erased in an instant. While these people are over in Turkey, on the other side of the world, rapidly burying these amazing temples. How did they know? Maybe they were just experiencing it. Maybe the sky turned dark for years, and that's all they were doing. But Kobegli Tepe, only 5% has been unearthed there. And there are already dozens of temple complexes, which means there are hundreds of temple complexes on top of a single hill in Turkey, all purposefully buried. And that was so that now when we uncover it, we could learn by what they were telling us. Now, if humanity knew that cosmic catastrophes regularly reset the Earth, then there would be no way that these governments could control us. There would be no way you would go to work every day at a job you hated. You would be preparing for the future. And we'll be right back after this break from our sponsors. Remember, Freedom Slips is #1 listener-supported radio. And if you can, please make a donation to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. #1 is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. #2 is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. #3, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. #4 is Advanced Ancient Global Civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back live on the #1 listener-supported radio on the internet, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Studio B. We're here every week on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern, noon Mountain Time, and we're just getting started with our new radio podcast, Cosmic Catastrophe. When we left off, We were talking about some of the intentional burials of the Turkey sites, specifically Kobegli Tepe and a newly discovered Bonchuklu Tarla nearby. Both intentionally buried, both archaeoastronomical sites. These were very advanced sites. Kobegli Tepe has bas-relief that is unquestionably some of the most beautiful carvings of the age. And these are supposed to be hunter-gatherers without steel tools, carving gigantic, meticulous pillars with bas-relief lizards and storks, and the Akkadian handbag. God knows what was in that bag. So it's clear that we had a global civilization prior to the Younger Dryas event. And it's also clear, based on the specificity of the carvings on the Moai and Kobegli Tepe, that this world culture, well, they all knew how to travel, circumnavigate the oceans. They probably knew how to map, and they knew about the stars and cosmic catastrophes. If they didn't know prior to it, they lived through it. And they buried all of these temples for posterity so that one day we would dig them up and realize that there was an advanced culture prior to our own. Yet that is not taught in schools. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And the evidence is mounting. Quite some time ago, Adam's calendar was discovered. It's quite controversial because it is suggested to be the oldest man-made structure in the world. And it's sometimes referred to as African Stonehenge. But Adam's calendar predates both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza by tens of thousands of years. It's located in Mpumalanga, South Africa. And it's a standing stone circle about 30 meters in diameter and has been estimated by some accounts to be more than 75,000 years old. Or perhaps it was built during the Toba catastrophe for the same reason that Kobegli Tepe was purposely buried. The bottleneck we talked about, the largest supervolcanic eruption on Earth. If the skies, I think that humanity would probably try to warn the future about what just occurred in some way. And maybe Adam's calendar is just that. Now, various astronomical alignments have been identified at Adam's calendar, and it is possibly the only example of a completely functional, mostly intact megalithic stone calendar in the entire world. Or there were others that were destroyed, perhaps. Now, if you're just tuning in, and it's your first time over here, because you're coming from our YouTube channels, there is a chat here at Freedom Slips. So when you go into freedomslips.com, you can click on the chat room and you need to register to be able to chat during the show. We're also going to do some call-in shows where you could call in and perhaps ask some questions on some Q&A shows. But let's get on with the topic of cosmic catastrophe and the fact that we have ancient civilizations on Earth prior to the Younger Dryas event. And we're now living perhaps the next Younger Dryas type event. This magnetic excursion we're going into is rapidly intensifying, meaning that our magnetic field is rapidly weakening in an exponential fashion. It was weakening at just 5% per decade 30 years ago, but now it's weakening maybe 5% every few years. And it's been increasing since 1859. So if you do some of the calculations, the magnetic field intensity drops to mass extinction level in just 2 decades. Maybe as early as 2035. So we have a lot to look forward to. Now, there's evidence that humanity has been on Earth using megalithic structures exclusively. A good friend of mine, Mario Buildreps, discovered a new method to determine the age of ancient monuments. And he called it the mathematical holistic orientation-based dating method. Where when the advent of Google Earth came out, Mario was fascinated by megaliths because his father worked in the field. And as soon as Google Earth came out, he started taking the orientations of the foundations of all the megalithic sites in the world. It took years for him to compile this data set. Thousands of hours. But in the end, it was worth it. When he looked at the data set, he saw that if you look at all of the orientations of the megalithic structures, they're pointing to 4 different North Pole positions. Each one slightly further south than the current pole position. And his work is fascinating. Now, what he determined was that it's the 100,000 year cycle that resets the clock. It's about 104,000 years. Every 104,000 years, we go through an ice age cycle. It's been happening for at least the last 500,000 years. If you look at the Antarctic ice core data, that cycle is glaringly obvious. And so Mario knew that data set, and that when he found that the megalithic structures pointed to 4 different pole positions, he made the conclusion that there is a crustal slip or a pole slip that's been going on every 100,000 years in a catastrophic event that reorients the Earth as it slightly slides to the south and rotates. And this can explain why Greenland has got a giant ice cap, because just 400,000 years ago, it was the North Pole. And it's moving south. Now, the good news is the last pole shift was 12,900 years ago and won't happen for another 88,000 years or so. But we are in a magnetic excursion, which is an extinction event. Now let's talk about Mario's work. He took the orientation pattern of 1,200 important ancient pyramids and temples, randomly spread around the world. And the amazing discovery was they appear to correlate 1-1 with temperature changes of the last series of glacial cycles. Ancient sites left an astounding mathematical fingerprint of Homo sapiens building activities. The foundations of ancient monuments are originally hundreds of thousands of years old in some cases. And some may be as old as Homo sapiens themselves, from more than 400,000 years ago. And this would include like Baalbek. If you're not familiar with Baalbek, it's a gigantic platform with some ruins on top, but it is the platform and the foundation that is unexplainable. With giant rocks weighing unimaginable weights, so heavy that we could barely move them today. I believe they're referred to, the 3 main ones, as the trilithon. But these are some big rocks, hundreds of tons. And no one knows why anyone would build something of that magnitude and for what purpose. Perhaps the last 400,000 years have been quite rough on Homo sapiens. And at some point, we were well aware of what was coming and said, you know, each time this thing happens, everything gets destroyed. Well, let's build some stuff that makes it so that we can warn them. And then we have all of the interlocking megalithic stoneworks worldwide that still remain. From how long have they remained? Are some of the South American megaliths perhaps hundreds of thousands of years old? Are the pyramids of Egypt from prior to the Younger Dryas event, as the evidence is showing? We just did another podcast on magnetic reversal news. And thanks to the work of Robert Schoch and his wife, Catherine, she discovered that many of the temples in Egypt were intentionally buried as well. And lots of that evidence have been removed. So you need to look at the historical photos to get down to the bottom of that. So what's going on? That's the question, and that's why we have the show. Why, if humanity has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, constantly being erased and rebuilding in an endless Groundhog Day type cycle, why wouldn't we want humanity to know that? Well, it's for control. It's to control the narrative. Clearly, people knew that these types of catastrophes changed everything. Eliminate the power structure. If a Carrington event, and when it happens, we believe it's going to happen in the next few years because we are at solar max in the next few years, and our magnetosphere has never been so weak. That if and when it happens, there is no more power structure, no more control. Government, the word, does not mean anything. Survival is on you. Will you rise to the occasion, survive and thrive, build a new community, create a new paradigm? Or will you stare into your cell phone and cry until you die? The choice is yours. What we want to do on this radio show is to bring some light, to light some of the things you may be able to do to survive and thrive. Now, a lot of people live in apartments in big cities. And if the power goes out, you can't stay there. So you need a bug out plan. So hopefully you have some relatives in the country, or perhaps you can just risk it and drive out into a rural area and look for community. It's your only hope, because in any of these events, any of these catastrophic scenarios, you're not going to be able to do it on your own with a backpack in the woods. You need a team. You know, it's a sad story. 120 years ago, 90% of the population in America knew how to provide for itself, grew its own food, got its own meat locally, butchered. And today, that number is less than 5%. It's like they're setting us up for a mass extinction on purpose. And I know many of you say, who are they? Well, I've been asking that question for a long time. And it's not anything specific, in my opinion. The way that you get the term they is when you allow a small group of people on a planet like Earth to own most of the wealth. They hold on to that power, and it's generational. We're talking about the Rothschilds and other banking cartel members, which now includes the IMF, the WEF, and the UN. These are the people that control the narrative. And now, well, many governments worldwide are complicit, especially the US government. The US government passed a law back in 2012, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which allows for propaganda for political gain. And so that year, well, till now, 100% of what's coming out of mainstream media is legal propaganda. It's not true. You look up the word propaganda, it doesn't say the truth. And so we are living an illusion. Maya. The conflicts worldwide, they're manufactured. Again, Maya. Political parties are designed for the same purpose, to divide a society. Because if a society isn't divided, it's not as easy to control. A group of harmonious people are going to tend not listen to authority because they're good. But a humanity in turmoil, in a state of war and hatred, division. It's all about the he said, she said. Then you can control the people through the division. And in case you haven't noticed, the powers that be, they have been feeding us poison now for decades. The food we eat is food for sheep if it's in a box or a bag and comes from the supermarket. It contains toxins, pesticides, and other poisons that are making us sick, obese, infertile, compliant, aggressive, and stupid. Very few people have access to whole food, nutritious food without chemicals or pesticides, and that's for good reason. Bill Gates owns most of the farmland in the US now. He's the #1 eugenicist on the planet. But now he's the go-to guy for vaccines. This is a clown world. And before it crumbles, I hope I can open the eyes and ears of the masses to what's going on, why they lie, and we can also learn some really cool science together. As the magnetosphere wanes from show to show, the magnetic field will continue to weaken. Solar flares will continue to be shot out of the sun. And we will have lots of things to discuss. So, it's all about control. You control the food supply. You control the population. And that is where we are now. So one of the main suggestions we would have here on the radio show that we've been screaming at the top of our lungs for 6 years over at Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube is to grow your own food if you can. Learn how to do it. Because there's going to come a time when you need to do it in order to survive. Learn how to wild harvest. Humans survive by wild harvesting. That's why we're here. So it's one of the most obvious ways to procure food. Now, all of the rivers and lakes and streams, for the most part, are polluted. So you have to know where you're getting your food. Even wild animals in city settings can be eating trash and other toxic material that can make them unsafe to eat. So there is a lot of knowledge that needs to be crammed into your head in order to survive and thrive if and when something bad happens here on the planet, i.e., a cosmic catastrophe. The most obvious cosmic catastrophe, and the reason we started Magnetic Reversal News and Oppenheimer Ranch Project, is going to be coming from our sun. And we'll just finish up the show by reminiscing about what it would look like here if a Carrington event occurred. Now, there are so many people watching the sun these days that we will have notice. Well, those people that are listening. I don't think that the mainstream media will be allowed to warn the public because it would result in chaos. So they'll just let it happen because the event will arrive here rapidly. Within 12 hours, it will begin. Power lines will begin to charge. And for a period of days or weeks, depending on the size and duration of the storm, the entire planet will fry. The technological world and infrastructure we live in will cause millions of fires in major cities worldwide, and the planet will burn for days, which is not dissimilar to the Younger Dryas event and the black mats. Now, if you don't know about the black mats, we'll get into that in an entire podcast, but it appears as if during the Younger Dryas mass extinction, that the entire northern hemisphere was lit on fire. And that evidence is a charcoal layer of burnt forest worldwide in the northern hemisphere. All happening 12,900 years ago. So, no wonder there was a mass extinction. And so when a Carrington event happens here, and it charges all those wires and transformers, and they all explode over a period of a day or so, the earth will burn. The skies will darken from the burning objects alone. Forests will be set ablaze, and there will be no firefighters to put them out, just like the olden days. And the auroras, and the trauma. The majority of people are not ready to handle a situation like this. They will literally lose their mind, and it's already happening now. Some of the effects of cosmic rays are cognitive diminution, insanity. It's called the full moon effect. Some people respond in a different way. Their energy is charged directly through the chakras. They can bring and channel the energy. For some people, it's too much. For the majority, there are negative effects. Are we ready for the next Carrington event? No. Is the military and the powers that be aware that this event is coming? Absolutely. We've all heard about the deep underground military bases. And now it's a phenomenon with billionaires, the billionaire bunker phenomenon. Now, we've been preparing for Armageddon since the beginning. And the date keeps getting pushed forward. But at some point, the event happens. And there is geologic evidence that this has occurred time and time again in the past. And in future episodes, we'll get into it. So thanks for watching the podcast. Support the #1 listener-supported radios, Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com. And we will see you next week. That's boom.